George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
1.3 million people in just 24 hours have signed a petition demanding a new general election in Britain, just 4 months after the last one. An extreme reaction? Well, not if you're living in Britain, it isn't, where everything that was bad has just gotten that much worse. And the International Criminal Court issues arrest warrants for the Prime Minister of Israel. The United States government, the German government, the Argentine government, and the Hungarian government, you might be seeing a pattern here, have said that they will not implement it. The British government remains ambiguous. No wonder, because we're still selling weapons to the state of Israel when nominally we're committed to arresting their Prime Minister if he arrives in London. You couldn't make it up, but there is no need to. The long-awaited Iranian strike on Israel appears to be imminent. Maybe even tonight, maybe even while we are on the air. Stay tuned for that. And of course, French, British, and American cruise missiles continue to rain down on Russian cities. What could possibly go wrong? Stay tuned. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
You'd have to be here, really, to understand the sense of anger, fury, actually, that has swept the United Kingdom in just 4 months of so-called Labour government under the plank of wood that is Sir Keir Starmer, unfeeling, unthinking, clunky, completely incapable of thinking or speaking on his feet. A man who has to read every line. Whoever hired this guy as a Queen's Counsel, now King's Counsel? Who would want to pay good money for him to represent them in court? But it's not just his personal failings and shortcomings that is the cause of the most remarkable petition ever launched in the history of the British Isles. A big claim. I'm going to back it up right at this moment at 7:03 on the evening of Sunday. That is to say, just 26 hours after the petition was launched, 1,358,000 people have signed demanding fresh elections in Britain. Some fools complain about the provenance of the petition. They don't like the fact that Nigel Farage and the Reform Party are heavily prominent in it. Or the retired police officer Norman Brennan, who we asked to come on the show tonight, but he required payment, and so we had to decline. But that doesn't mean we're not right behind the petition. We absolutely are. Who cares who started the petition? It has captured the zeitgeist. No petition ever has garnered that number of signatures on a petition, and it is growing tens of thousands per hour. It's going to reach millions of signatories, and that is because of the rank betrayal that Keir Starmer is already guilty of just 4 months into his premiership. The one that rankles most with me, and about which you've heard me speak many times, is the theft of the cold weather payment allowance paid to millions of British pensioners to help them through a bitterly cold winter. It's already unprecedentedly cold here in this global warming Britain. It is almost as bad as the weather can be here in the United Kingdom. Storms, snow, -8, -10, -12 degrees in the country, and pensioners having to struggle through deciding whether they eat or whether they heat. And no matter how much they heat, given that energy bills are 4 times what they were just 2.5 years ago, they're unlikely to be able to heat their homes sufficiently. I am not short of my electricity bill, but I'm going around shutting doors, making sure no drafts are letting the heating out. Imagine if you were a poor old age pensioner in Britain. And what makes it much worse is that Starmer knew that he was going to do this before a single vote was cast. He did not even properly study what the impact of this measure would be. And worse still, he did it for Zelensky. Don't take my word for it. Look back at the chronology. The very next day after Starmer stole the coal from Britain's old age pensioners, his foreign secretary, Idi Amin Dada David Lammy, was in Kiev, promising 3 times the amount saved by stealing from the pensioners in perpetuity every year. 3 billion every year forever is what Keir Starmer has promised Zelensky. The ancient and peculiar hatred of the British towards the Russian people is a subject I'll come back to later in this monologue. But there are many other betrayals of which Starmer is guilty, and he is completely without the artifice to defend himself. He cannot find the words. He cannot find the empathy. He's launched a new battle today in the Mail on Sunday against Britain's benefit culture. But he is the recipient of the greatest amount of beneficence from private donors of any British politician in history. Just get your head around that. This man is wearing glasses, costing thousands of pounds, paid for by a private donor and not declared as they should have been. When you see him in a suit, I know he doesn't cut much of a dash, but somebody paid £12,000 for that suit, and he didn't declare that either. He has taken more freebies than any British politician in recorded history. This man who wants to make war on the benefit culture is the biggest beneficiary of them all. And we got a glimpse in the week of who might be paying in the end. You know, I predicted when he betrayed Britain's farmers at the budget by introducing a tax on inheritance of small family farms that again he must have known he was going to do, but didn't mention it during the election campaign. I knew what he was up to. And 4 days later, he was sat in number 10 Downing Street with Blackrock, who will be buying the farmlands from the bankrupted farming families that have been ruined as a result of his treachery. Huge numbers of farmers and their well-wishers, of which I am one, were in central London, firing the first shot in what is going to be a long, bruising, damaging battle for the government if they go forward with their efforts to destroy farming in Britain as we have known it for centuries. He was right behind a suicide bill. They're not even hiding it anymore. Old grannies and grandmas, if they're cold, if they can't heat their house in the winter, well, we have a solution, said the government. We'll put you in a capsule, give you a glass of sherry and a jab on your upper arm, and you'll slowly slip away. This suicide death cult that is Labour is not content with killing people in the Middle East, killing people in the Ukraine, killing people in the Yemen. They're killing our own pensioners. They're killing our own chronically sick. Rather than investing in care at the end of life, they would prefer to persuade you that you've become a burden on your family and on society and on the taxpayer. And it would be a jolly good thing if you would shuffle off quietly into this good night. He has backed a genocide in Gaza, an actual genocide. Don't take my word for it. Take the word of the world's highest court, the International Criminal Court. Take the word of the International Criminal Court, the ICC, which this very week issued arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, the former defense minister, sacked by Netanyahu just the other week. Arrest warrants. The Prime Minister of Israel will have to be arrested if he lands in any country that considers itself to be law-abiding. That excludes the United States, of course, which not only came out immediately to say that Netanyahu will still be welcome there, they actually threatened the court and threatened their allies who have already declared that they will implement the decision. How could they do otherwise? It's their court. They set it up. I warned them at the time. I opposed the setting up of the ICC in Parliament. I told them the only people that will ever be tried here are black Africans and Serbians. And so until now, it has been the case. But now we've got Netanyahu wanted on a wanted poster, on an Interpol alert. The United States is threatening to invade the Netherlands. I'm not making that up. They passed a motion in the Senate. It's called, helpfully, the clue is in the name, the Invasion of the Netherlands Act, in which they say they will actually invade Amsterdam. Now, I've got a soft, my wife was born there. I travel there frequently. I've got a soft spot for the people of the Netherlands. It's not their fault that the ICC has its court there. It's not their fault that the ICJ has its court there. It's not their fault. Don't invade them, please, Joe Biden. What are you going to do? Send your paratroopers in? You're going to make a Marines landing at Zandvoort-on-Zee? Are you going to fight your way over the canals and through the beautiful alleyways, through the tulips in Amsterdam? You lunatics! Lindsey Graham, Senator, slug, Mrs. Lindsey Graham, warned France, Italy, warned our friends and allies, he said on television, that we will take sanctions against you if you implement the arrest warrants of the International Criminal Court. This is gangsterism. This is a political class more fitting of Al Capone's Chicago than a supposedly democratic country with its capital in Washington, D.C. You're threatening to invade people for obeying the law? You're threatening to sanction people for obeying the law? What happened to your international rules-based order in which you give the rulings and the orders and everyone else obeys them? You lunatics. You have destroyed your country's standing in the world, and you're not finished yet. You intend to double down, maybe tonight. You and the tail of your dog, the United Kingdom, are going to give the lives of our own servicemen in defense of a government, Netanyahu, who's wanted by the international police. He's on wanted posters. But if Iran evens the score tonight or tomorrow, you're going to sacrifice our own people, our own blood and treasure in defense of a prime minister whose arrest you are committed to. The British government is still selling weapons to Netanyahu. How does that work? You're selling weapons to somebody who, if he comes to see the weapons, you are committed to arresting him on war crimes charges, on charges of crimes against humanity. This is insanity. You lunatics, all of you lunatics. You haven't just taken over the asylum. You are running amok through the capital cities of Washington, D.C., of London, and of Paris. Shortly, you'll hear from the sage that is Colonel Douglas Macgregor. If his people hadn't emigrated so many generations ago from my own country of Scotland, I'd be right behind them for Prime Minister of the UK. As it is, I'm still hoping that somewhere in that motley crew being assembled on the Potomac, there'll be room for one sane voice in Donald Trump's administration in the form of Douglas Macgregor. I don't want to preempt what he's going to say, but I can tell you what I'm going to ask him. What could possibly go wrong if we join a war against Iran tonight? What can possibly go wrong when we're firing cruise missiles into Russia? Just get your head around that. Britain, France, and the United States are firing cruise missiles into Russia. For those of you old enough to remember the old Soviet Union, when we had a balance of terror in the world, where it was simply inconceivable that either of these superpowers would fire weapons directly at each other, because the entire world could go up in nuclear flames if we did. Well, that's now exactly what we are doing. And all the signs are the United States was pushed into it by the yapping chihuahuas in London and in Paris, neither of whom could fight Russia themselves for 3 days. That's their own estimates. So who are they counting on to save them from Russia's wrath? I'll tell you who. It's you in the United States, you in the Midwest, you in the southern boondocks, you in the Rust Belt, you on the coast. It's you that they intend to die for them. Well, all I've got time for is to say that Donald Trump was elected on a clear pledge to end the war in Ukraine. What, therefore, is taking place constitutes a coup d'etat against the settled will, the declared will of the American people. The American people voted to end the war Joe Biden has escalated. I therefore say I'm with General Flynn when he calls for the removal of the Biden administration. I don't know how it could be done. Article 25 of the Constitution, although getting Kamala Harris, who's gone AWOL, by the way, in the place of Joe Biden might not be that much of a step forward. But the United States Armed Forces have to do something. They must stop a senile dementia president in the last days of his defeated presidency from setting the world alight in a nuclear conflagration that will leave us all irradiated ash and dust. Stay tuned. I'll be right back. It's the mother of all talk shows.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now, David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down, the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. You've been thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news, and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, you know, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that at least.
You've got blood on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before it was published, but actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003 are finally brought to book.
Yeah. Here's the headline in the Independent newspaper. Donald Trump ally warns Keir Starmer the US will crush the UK economy if it helps arrest Benjamin Netanyahu. Senator Lindsey Graham hits out at US allies, warning they should not comply with the warrant for the Israeli leader issued by the ICC. So much for the special relationship. Some of you idiots out there think that the United States will go into oblivion and history to defend Britain if Russia singles it out for attack. Well, that's all you are. You're just fools if you believe that. We've got a poll running. It's a record, actually. I think it's going to be the biggest poll ever. So far, 45,181 people have voted in the poll. Is Netanyahu guilty of war crimes? Yes or no? Wow. 45,000. Get voting. If you want to call the show, it's toll-free in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. In the UK and Ireland, it's free of charge, 0808 196 5522. And the worldwide number is 0044 203 966 2625. Well, I think I'm going to take a call before we turn to Colonel Macgregor. It's Vincent in Glasgow on Ukraine. Go ahead, Vincent.
Hi, George. This week I heard both William Hague and Ian Duncan-Smith make similar statements. They said, and I quote them, "If we don't provide Ukraine with weaponry, we will have British boots on the ground." Now, these comments also echo comments made by Zelensky last year and the US Secretary of Defence last year, Lloyd Austin, who said if Putin wins, the idea that we put troops on the ground is very likely. Now, what should be terrifying is our political elites are literally saying, without a casus belli or declaration of war, that we will be sent to fight Russians. Because, as is even admitted in the media, that from the Kursk to Pokrovsk, the Ukrainian army is collapsing. So if I can finish and then ask you a quick question. Right? Now, another reason why I think it's clear that these demented people are planning on sending us to fight Russia is all the policy think tanks from the Royal United Services Institute, Chatham House and Iran Corporation all claim that the war must go on till 2026 for a strategic Russian defeat. However, if the Ukrainian army is collapsing in 2024, how is this going to be possible in 2026, lest Western forces are deployed in the Ukraine? So do you think that a Russian retaliation to our Storm Shadow strikes would be used as that casus belli in order to deploy Western forces in the Ukraine?
Well, British forces won't make a blind bit of difference. I'm picking my words carefully for legal reasons, but also for reasons of taste. There are not many British boots. In fact, the entire British Army, Navy and Air Force could have fitted comfortably into Villa Park in Birmingham for the Aston Villa game the other day and still had room for a herd of elephants at the away end. We have fewer than 100,000 service personnel, Army, Navy and Air Force. Our own officer class has told us that if we went to war with Russia, we would not survive 3 days. Short of launching a nuclear weapon from Britain, which would, of course, by return of post, mean the end of Britain and every single person in it, the British war effort would be over in 3 days. None of the other armed forces are any bigger, any better, and none of the public opinions in any of these countries would tolerate the boots on the ground scenario that you posit. So I don't believe that that's going to happen. If Keir Starmer announces conscription, well, that'll put the signatories on the petition up somewhat, but the idea of sending conscripts in to fight the Russian army, it's laughable, really. In any case, as I have said multiple times before, we in the Workers' Party, and we in No to NATO, No to War, and I'm sure many other organizations too, will fight with every breath in our bodies against any attempt to conscript our young men and women to go and fight Joe Biden's war in the Ukraine. And I am confident that we would have the support of millions, tens of millions of people in Britain. 1.3 million people already want Starmer out. If he wants to make that 10.3, 20.3, 30.3, go ahead, be my guest. Do you feel lucky, punk, Starmer? That's my answer to you. Simon from Florida, nowadays from Weaponized News, an excellent site, and who often gives us the benefit of his expert analysis, is next on the line. Simon, welcome.
Greetings to you, Mr. Galloway, and to your worldwide audience. Well, unfortunately, I have to do my normal trick, which is tell you that things are actually even worse than you're telling the audience. The Americans have put out, before the Russians, their new nuclear policy guidance document, which is called a 491 report, and was presented to Congress just a week ago. And in that, it actually says that they won't use nuclear weapons against other countries that don't have nuclear weapons, which is jolly nice of them. But they do say that they'll make an exception if those countries violate the terms of their non-proliferation treaty status. And after the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency resolution that went through with 19 votes, mainly the golden billion, obviously, against Iran, there's now widespread sentiment in Iran that's being loudly published in all of the Iranian newspapers this week, in both Farsi and in English, saying that they've had enough and they're going to pull out of the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. That would then fulfill clearly the American written requirement, albeit that they have this provision that they can always adapt their policy to suit circumstances, which means they can make changes in secret whenever they want, like with the rules-based international order, to then preemptively use nuclear weapons against Iran. Now, having put that in a document that's been submitted to Congress with no pushback whatsoever, and having stacked his cabinet with Make Israel Great Again cabinet appointees, it does make the situation even more fraught than appears on the surface. Now, the same newspapers have confirmed that they're just trying to set a date for the current Iranian president, Mr. Pezeshkian, to go and visit President Putin in Moscow to sign their comprehensive cooperation agreement that they've been negotiating for over a year. It's all done. They're literally just trying to set up the date for a state visit. Now, the deputy Russian foreign minister, Mr. Andrei Rudenko, yesterday in an interview with TASS, has confirmed for the first time that that does include extensive defense and security commitments. And what was very clear in the Russian nuclear policy doctrine that was issued on the 19th of November is they are now extending the nuclear umbrella over their former allies. So they've done it for Belarus, they've done it for North Korea, and it looks like in days it will effectively be over Iran, which completely changes the dynamics of the situation. The Chinese ambassador to Iran has put out a statement saying that they will stand by Iran essentially come what may. So the forces are very, very distinctly solidifying on one side versus the other. With the extension.
Yes, I think, Simon, that war is looking, all-out war, is looking increasingly unstoppable. I'll go on trying to stop it and go on preaching against it, but I have a very clear feeling that it's a losing battle. That all-out war is now unstoppable. And the solidifying of the two sides that you describe is clear. I mean, it's long hoved into view, but it's now in crystal clear 2020 vision. It is the United States and the United Kingdom, with France a half-in, half-out partner, and the Russian, Chinese, Iranian, and global South, including North Korea. These are the two sides in what looks increasingly like an unstoppable war. The Iranians have, from their own point of view, entirely logically, decided that they have already done it, produced sufficient enriched, highly enriched uranium to make hundreds of nuclear weapons. And they can do so in 24 hours if they have not already done so. It's then a case of putting them on the tip of a missile, and they have plenty of those, hundreds of thousands of those, and they can defend themselves against any American-Israeli aggression. And that would be the end of the world, I think, because if Iran and Israel get into a nuclear shooting match, it's ineluctably obvious that the United States would join in, and the Biden administration and the Trump administration, as you say, are both stuffed full of the same ghouls, the same gruesome half-wits, bloodlusting cultists, and therefore nothing's going to change in that regard. And so I have no hesitation in saying that I believe that this year or early next, we're going to be in a potentially existential situation. Thanks, Simon, for that. Here are the numbers again. It's toll-free in the United States and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge in the UK and Ireland, 0808 196 5522. And the worldwide number is 0044 203 966 2625. Get voting. Is Netanyahu guilty of war crimes? Yes or no? You can answer on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, or on my X, my Twitter, or on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. It's overwhelmingly the case that you have voted so far that Netanyahu is guilty as charged. 99%, 91%, 91%, 96% against 1, 9, 9, and 4%. Getting on for 50,000. I'm sure we're going to reach the 50,000 votes margin very soon. We're still trying to get a line to Colonel Macgregor. So while we wait for that, let me give you some comments from YouTube. If you scan the QR code now and leave a comment on the YouTube stream, we'll try and read it out. Like this one. Jack Klugman, great name, says Ukraine was the template of theft by Blackrock and the IMF, exactly what they wanted for Russia. Indeed so. Joseph Roy says Russia has the capability to defeat every country in the NATO allowance and probably the world and Sebastian Gorka. And nobody in foreign policy is threatening Putin like Trump is in a spot of strength. Zorka may be the very worst of the picks, and there's a lot of bad picks in the incoming Donald Trump administration. Z.A. Lucasaid says Israel has already invaded Amsterdam 2 weeks ago. Touché! Joe Manchik for Congress says there's no doubt about it. The Zionist war criminal Bibi Netanyahu is clearly guilty of war crimes. And Bob Cosmic says Israel is an ideology. It's not a country, a state, or even a nation. Let's stay in England, where David in Swindon wants to talk about Ukraine. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about Ukraine, and in particular the North Korean soldiers that are there. Let me just preface this with saying I'm not pleased they're there, but they've got the right. Anybody's got the right to use what armies they want around the world. But wasn't it funny that
where are they, David? Has anyone seen them?
Oh no, you've taken my thunder now. Yeah, nobody. I've read all the reports. It's all hearsay. South Koreans have said they're there, 100,000, 20,000. America has said there, and Ukraine. Nobody, with all our technology, has actually seen a Ukrainian face or whatever. Sorry, a North Korean face, whatever.
A North Korean face. They're quite easily spotted, you know. They're wearing Kim Jong-un badges and fur hats. They've got Asiatic faces. Yet nobody's seen them. It's funny that.
But the main point I want to get onto is there was a report on France 24, and I recommend after this show you look at News 24, France 24. They've debunked, there were millions of views of a picture of North Korean soldiers in Russia. That picture was a year old. If you look at they actually did a photo of it, and they found the photo a year ago, and it wasn't taken in Russia. Likewise, there's another picture of a soldier that's got like a desert hat on, and they're saying that he is actually a Russian soldier. So, but they use that as a pretense.
I tell you what, David, we haven't seen any North Koreans, but we have today seen a British mercenary recently retired from the British Army. Quite a senior rank, I understand, captured by the Russians in Kursk. So no North Koreans, but British POWs are beginning to turn up.
What I'm saying is that was the pretense for launching, our ATACMS and Storm Shadows.
Mm.
They said, we must do this because we've got North Koreans. It's a bit like...
Must stop the North Korean hordes.
Yeah, it's a bit like, say, when they put the pictures of the beheaded babies out, nobody's actually seen them, but they use that as a pretense.
They don't exist.
Exactly.
David,
okay,
thank you for that call. Let me go to Canada, Vancouver, one of my favourite cities, where Dean wants to talk about the Western elites. Go ahead, Dean.
Hi, George. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Hi.
I send you respect and thanks for everything you do and best wishes for your family. As I spoke with the producer, I'm talking about the overarching issue that we're confronted with, which is that the socioeconomic elites, the transnational socioeconomic elites of the West, have pushed policies which are in direct contrast for societies maintaining its side of the social contract with the individuals. And so this is, everybody can see this, what's happened in Germany, but this is happening everywhere. This is happening in your country. This is happening in my country. All of these so-called leaders are idiotic, obvious buffoon cucks of the socioeconomic elite. What say you?
Yeah, I agree. Although I don't even understand why the socioeconomic elites want this. I can understand why a deranged, unhinged ideologue can want this. But I don't understand why companies and corporations would want it. I don't understand why Elon Musk would want it. I'm not saying he does want it, but he's not doing anything to stop it. He's not using his immense media power to stop it, at least, because there will be no Twitter, there will be no X, there will be no factories, there will be no shops, there will be no clothes, there will be no goods, there will be no money, there will be no people. Why is that in the interest of the elites? That I don't actually get, Dean. Last word to you.
Well, George, I think we've hit a situation where through a spiraling self-reinforcing mechanism, the elites have become so wealthy that they are actually psychologically detached from the 99%, the reality of the 99%. They are driven purely by ego, and this must be seen as actually the manifestation of evil. Thank you very much, George.
Well, I get that thesis. I don't share it. I still harbor the hope that those who actually don't want to see the end of the world yet, that rules out the 30 million evangelical American maniacs for Donald Trump who are positively praying for the rapture, for the end of times, at Armageddon in the state of Palestine. They want it. That I get, in the same way I got why Jim Jones's devotees drank the Kool-Aid. What I don't get is why people who are living very, very good lives here in the world as it currently exists want to end it, either skulking in an underground shelter and coming out eventually to the black skies of the nuclear winter. That I don't get, and I have yet to be persuaded by anyone of a convincing theory as to why. Let me take a quick break, and I'm hoping we'll have Colonel Macgregor after that quick break. Stay tuned. It's the mother of old talk.
interrupt this program to bring you a special announcement. A big thank you to all our wonderful listeners, as the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast is now one of the most listened to political podcasts in the entire world. We are the #1 English-speaking political podcast in the Middle East, and in the last year alone have charted in the top 10 in podcast land in Pakistan, Russia, and China. Like, rate, and subscribe to the MOATS podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts to be a part of the fastest rising independent news show in the world.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows with George Galloway.
Well, that podcast, as you've just heard, is going great guns. It is this week in the top 5 in Indonesia. That'll please my good wife. In the top 20 in Ireland. That'll please my old mother. And in the top 10 in Egypt. We passed again 250,000 streams on Spotify alone this week. So let's get to 500,000 by Christmas if we can. The way to do it is to scan that QR code in the corner of your screen now. YouTube comments, oh my goodness. Ian Puddick, police corruption, sends £49.99. How wonderful, Ian. You are so generous to the Mother of All Talk Shows. He says no one signed for genocide and World War III with Russia. Exactly. Nobody voted for that. But I predicted that within 6 months that Keir Starmer would have this country at war. Another of my predictions that has already come true. Fuck you, money, says Keir has lost the plot. Maggie only used to take our taxes and buy the missiles. Well, Christina Haynes says, does Starmer want to decrease the population in Britain? He's being totally reckless in internal and foreign policies. And Lorenzo Orsini says, I'd rather be led by Caligula's horse than any of these rodents. And Abu Swale, I've just lost your comment. Abu Swale, forgive me. If I get it back, I promise I will read it out. Is Netanyahu guilty of war crimes? Blimey. It is astounding. I think we are at 50,000 votes cast, and 99, 91, 91, and 96% across the 4 portals say that we are. It is a remarkable thing that a government 4 months old now has an incredible 1.4 million people calling for new elections. There has never been anything like this. Now, these petitions ordinarily don't add up to a hill of beans, but the speed with which such a massive number of people have gone online, it's not like you just sign something somebody puts in front of you. You've got to go online and do it, though I encourage all of you to do it, is an astounding thing. Anyway, let's go to Zoran in Serbia on the ICC. Go ahead, Zoran.
Hello, George. Hello. I admire your work, and I just want to be informed. I don't know when ICC changed the rules, because I call from Serbia and I know the Ratko Mladic, Slobodan Milošević, and Radovan Karadzic, they were also accused for war crime. And Serbia was once upon a time under the sanction because won't deliver these guys to the ICC. Now we see the opposite things. So when it happened, when they changed the rules.
Well, as you heard me say, Zoran, earlier, when I opposed the ICC, I predicted that the only people ever convicted there would be black Africans and Serbians. And so far, I'm right, because Netanyahu has not been arrested yet. He's not in jail in The Hague yet. And the United States government is promising to crush any economy of its closest friends that seeks to bring him under arrest. So maybe he'll never darken the door of that jail. Thanks for that, Zoran. And hello to all my friends in Serbia. Mick is in my old stamping ground of Bradford on Starmer. Let's hear Mick. Go ahead, sir.
Evening, George. Firstly, thanks for everything you do for everyone and what you know, the information you bring to people. The point I'd like to make, I've just been looking at online and seeing what can be done, what mechanisms exist for us to deal with bad politicians. And what I'm thinking is our imbecile of a Prime Minister is supporting a genocidal maniac in Israel who has now been accused of being, accused of genocide by the ICC.
A war criminal.
Correct, a war criminal. And not only that, he's also supporting another illegitimate leader in Ukraine, because Zelensky has passed his term. He's got no right to be there, and he's dragging us into wars that don't concern us. Is that a reason? Is that a good enough reason to start a campaign to have our imbecile Prime Minister and all the other parliamentarians that support him in this recalled?
Well, you can't, unfortunately, recall them. I was a co-signatory on a bill tabled by, of all people, Zach Goldsmith, which sought to have a mechanism whereby constituents can recall their Member of Parliament if they're unhappy with their Member of Parliament's performance. That seems to me a basic democratic right. But that bill was defeated and was so amended that now you can recall only an MP who is guilty of a criminal offence which sends them to prison for 3 months or more, or who is suspended by the Standards and Privileges Committee of the House of Commons, who are the cronies, of course, of the MPs. The MPs are policing the MPs, if you get my drift. If anyone is suspended for more than 10 sitting days under this legislation, then you can hold a recall petition. But the chances of any of our MPs being so suspended, even if they're caught on camera clubbing a constituent to the ground and repeatedly punching them in a prone position, that's not going to do it either. Neither will this petition force a new general election, but it will gravely unnerve the MPs. It will gravely unnerve the Labour MPs, who will begin to see the writing on the wall for themselves at the next general election, and who will experience every Thursday in the local government by-elections ever worsening results. And that is something worth doing. So the best advice I can give you is tell your MP that you are finished with them, that you will never support them again. I'd go further and say you should join me in the Workers' Party of Britain. You should sign up to No to NATO, No to War. You should sign the petition and get people in their millions to sign it. And I believe you will make a difference. Now look, we were unable to get a line to His Excellency Colonel Douglas Macgregor. So he's joining us on the telephone on line 1. Colonel Macgregor, I'm terribly sorry that we don't have you in vision, but Colonel Macgregor on the line is worth 10 people in vision. So I'm very glad that you have been able to join us, albeit in this way. I'd like your analysis first, please, on what could possibly go wrong with the United States, Britain and France firing cruise missiles into Russia. How could that backfire?
Well, I think it's already begun to backfire. I'm afraid that the Russians, and specifically Mr. Putin and his inner circle, are frustrated at their inability to signal unambiguously to the West that they will not tolerate any more interference in Ukraine. From their standpoint, this war is effectively coming to an end. They would like to negotiate an end to it, straighten out whatever needs to be straightened out geographically, and work with a new government in Kiev. And we have decided that we're going to try and bully them, which is a serious mistake. They've now lowered the nuclear threshold to the point where conceivably they could respond with a nuclear weapon. But frankly, given the hypersonic missiles at their disposal, and they are clearly ahead of us in the West with regard to this technology, I think they could probably do just as much damage with high-end explosives on conventional missiles with hypersonic capability that they could with nuclear weapons. But I think we have to consider the high possibility that we could really be on the verge of war with Russia.
Well, it's clear to me, you'll know better in Washington, but it's clear to me that a bloc has been formed between the most belligerent of the NATO European governments and the last ditchers, the dead enders in Washington, to try and stop any possibility of Donald Trump being able to bring an end to this war. Is that how it looks to you?
Well, I think that's true. The problem right now is that President Trump has actually allowed people working for him to send mixed signals. He recently appointed a new deputy national security advisor, this man, Sebastian Gorka, and he has already said publicly that when President Trump takes office, he's going to threaten Putin with a rise in aid to Ukraine if he doesn't agree to end the war. If that's true, that would be sheer lunacy. Then I'm afraid that right now, Mr. Putin and his inner circle may decide that they have nothing to lose by effectively challenging us to a war before Mr. Trump even reaches office. In other words, the signals coming out of Washington are a mix of arrogance, ignorance, and frankly, stupidity. The Trump who months ago said, well, we need to stop the killing, seems to have disappeared in favor of some new macho man who wants to demonstrate that he's really in control. And the truth is, George, we are not in control. And we are not the nation of 91. We're the nation of 2024. Our forces are very different now, and they're not terribly capable. And we're not prepared to challenge the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, or anybody to a regional war of any kind. And as you know, most of the world has turned against us because of our stance on Israel. As a result, I think we should be much more interested in coming to some sort of terms privately with the Russians that would put an end to this war in Ukraine. But instead, we have foolhardy people on all sides practicing public diplomacy in an effort to try to prove to everyone that they're tougher, better, smarter than their peers. The opposite, of course, is the case.
Well, you lead me into an avenue I was going to leave to the end, but it makes more sense to raise it with you now. And I do so with some circumspection because, the fat lady hasn't sung yet. Donald Trump hasn't got these weirdos in his cabinet yet. And I still have some hope that the likes of you may end up in that administration in one way or another, one capacity or another. But so far, so bad. It is almost beyond parody that he sends the guitar-playing evangelical lunatic Mike Huckabee to be the ambassador to Israel. It seems incredible that little Marco Rubio, whom he showered with insults and who showered Trump with insults, should now be in charge of America's foreign policy. It's incredible that the new Secretary of Defense is a man who believes in the red heifers and the rebuilding of the temple, and who does not admit that there is such a thing as a Palestinian. And I could go on. Appointment after appointment after appointment has been disappointment after disappointment. How? Why? How did this happen?
I think we have to look at the sources of money and power that ultimately delivered the election for Donald Trump. And this is something that sadly characterizes business in Washington. You've certainly pointed to it to some extent in London. But in Washington right now, everybody knows where the money is. And the money is on the side of Israel, and as you point out, the evangelicals, but largely on the side of Israel and its agents here in the United States, who assembled enormous quantities of money and made it possible for him to win the election. So he's now hostage to his donors to a large extent. And I'm beginning to think that President Trump wanted desperately to be president as vindication for what he didn't end up with in 2020. But beyond that, I'm not sure how carefully he's considered everything. And George, you know, any president who is heavily engaged with conflicts overseas, which is where we are now, usually fails miserably at home. And he has a very, let us say, ambitious agenda here in the United States. History tells us that you can't do both at once. You can do one or the other. And right now he's being dragged in the direction of widening wars both in Ukraine and in the Middle East. And that doesn't bode well for the future. So I think a lot of people in the United States are already beginning to feel some sense of buyer's remorse, that he's not turning out to be headed in the direction that everybody had hoped for, which was peace, end the conflicts, and a return to focus on what's important here at home.
Well, let's turn to what may be about to happen. My sources tell me that the Iranian strike in retaliation for Israel's strikes, this would make it 3-3 in footballing terms, is imminent, might even be in the air. And it's promised that it will be of a new type and will be condign punishment. Should it be so, the United States and the United Kingdom are committed to sacrificing our own soldiers' lives. They've said so, in defense of Israel. And that could get very heavy promise indeed. If Iran hits Israel, are we into the feared regional war, all-out war in the region, from the Levant all the way to the Persian Gulf? And if so, how's that going to turn out?
I think we are, very definitely. Now, whether Iran strikes now or waits a little longer is unclear. To be frank, George, the waiting has worked in Iran's favor. The Russians, and to a lesser extent the Chinese and others, have built up very substantial integrated air defenses, added tremendously to Iran's military capabilities, particularly its missile arsenal. So Iran has really profited from the long pause. Israel has not. The situation inside Israel is dire. Their economy is in ruins. The population is gradually becoming demoralized. Some people say they are, but I happen to watch Israeli television. It strikes me that they are being fed a steady stream of disinformation and lies, much as we are in the United States and in the United Kingdom. So I'm not sure they realize just yet how dire their situation is. But Mr. Netanyahu has only one hope left, and that is that the Iranians do, in fact, attack him and attack him decisively, at which point in time he can scream for help, and we still have substantial forces arrayed designed to do that. But it's also clear that the Iranians are prepared for it, and more important, that the Russians in particular are not going to stand idle if they do it. And with each passing day, it looks more and more like the Turks will move from bloviating to action, particularly in Lebanon, where the situation has gotten out of hand completely. A couple of million people are trying to leave the country and move to Turkey. The Turks have millions of refugees as it is, can't take any more. So I think you're right. If Iran strikes, I think what we have to reckon with is a regional war. And keep in mind that what happens in Ukraine doesn't stay in Ukraine. That war, along with the Middle Eastern war, they will overlap. And we stand an excellent chance right now of coming out the losers on both ends.
Finally, Colonel, but it's a big finally. The ICC arrest warrants have now been issued, months late because of British obfuscation and obstructionism, but they're now there. Netanyahu is officially wanted for war crimes and crimes against humanity. It's come to something when I can say that. The signatories of the ICC are obliged to carry out the arrest warrant, but your politicians, in particular Lindsey Graham, is openly threatening to crush is the word he used, the economies of Britain, Italy, France, the Netherlands, and other countries that will do their legal duty, feel that they must for fear of being prosecuted in their own countries. And Senator Tom Cotton in the United States reminded us all about the Invasion of the Netherlands Act, or I think it might be called the Invasion of the Hague Act. Perhaps Amsterdam would be spared and your forces would land only in The Hague. This kind of gangsterism, lawlessness, how bad does it make America look in your view?
Well, if we proceed along that road that you've just described, I suspect that almost everyone will become a member of BRICS. The European Union and NATO will simply vanish. Look, I don't see us carrying through on all of these threats. But what I do see is no effort whatsoever while the people in Washington remain who they are, that anything will be done about Israel. Frankly, they're paralyzed. And until the people here in the United States realize that I'm talking about the American people collectively, that they are suffering as a consequence. Their standard of living is falling, their economy is crumbling, the financial markets are tanking, and all of those things will happen if we get into this regional war in the Middle East. Once that happens, everything in Washington will change. There'll be a dramatic turnover. But for the moment, until that occurs, there will be no change. You know, I may have said this before, but a friend who was a Spanish general staff officer and worked with me years ago and at Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers Europe, said, you know, Colonel, the United States is not a country, it's a planet. He's right. We very much live on our own planet, much as Britain used to before World War I. We are oblivious to all of the things that you were discussing, and it will only occur, that is, a change will only occur when it becomes clear that we are neither immune nor isolated or invulnerable.
Colonel Douglas Macgregor, retired U.S. Army Colonel, Defense Policy Consultant. I am deeply grateful, as always, for your time, and hopefully we'll be able to have you in vision next time also. Now, a quick break, and then the likes of which you have never seen. When we met him in Kazan, Diego Ruzzarin, the biggest YouTube figure in all of Latin America, a philosopher, and many, many other things. He hit me like a tsunami. I think he's going to hit you the same way. Stay tuned. He'll be right up after this break. I defy anyone to contradict the point that I just made, that every person alive today was born of woman. So why would we say that the people in the labor wards, in the maternity units, are people who are giving birth? Why can't we say women? Why can't we say mothers. Why can't we say women who are breastfeeding, mothers who are breastfeeding? Why do we need to say people who are chest feeding? All of these words, and indeed all of the trend that you say you dissociate yourself from, of transgenderism, transmania, I call it, are all taking rights away from women.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Diego Ruzzarin is a very, very, very big man in Latin America, but largely unknown to the English-speaking audience. Although he crosses all of the Latin American divides, born in Brazil, living in Mexico, fluent in multiple languages. And I just knew that when we introduced him onto the mother of all talk shows, a new, albeit small, but rich and powerful world would open up for him. Diego Ruzzarin, geopolitical analyst and author, welcome to the mother of all talk shows. You'll need to perform now after a build-up like that, Diego. The conversation I just had with Colonel Douglas Macgregor, retired U.S. Army colonel, could scarcely have been more prescient with doom, could scarcely have been more serious, more pessimistic. Is that how you're feeling in the global south? Do they realize how close the global north and west has taken everyone to oblivion?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, George, for having me on. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I do now have to live up to the standards of that amazing presentation. Having said that, it is true. We are 90 seconds away from midnight in the doomsday clock, which people rarely talk about anymore, but it's kind of scary. Having said that, I think the environment in the global south is, in a way, disconnected from reality, which is scary for us. What I would like to say is that, in a way, every time an empire is near its fall, it tends to become highly violent. It tends to cling to power in a manner that becomes an existential threat to everyone's life. And like Einstein said, and this sentence has been quoted many, many times, is that Einstein didn't know which weapons we were going to use to fight World War III. But he assured us that World War IV was going to be fought with stick and stones, because nothing else was going to be left out of human society. And I think that's the way we need to approach this moment that we are living right now. The existential threat, mutual assured destruction, is something that we should all be aware of. And in the end, what is most worrying about it all is that we're doing it in the name of revenue and profit for a few manufacturing companies in the global north. And in the end, everyone is about to pay a high price for this in a way, madness of capital.
Well, the G20 came to the global south in Brazil just last week. Were there any signs there of people realizing that we're all looking down the barrel of a nuclear gun?
Well, I think the most terrifying sign was President Biden walking into the middle of the jungle after authorizing the use of long-range missiles by Ukraine against Russia. That was already a sign of the apocalypse by itself. But on the other hand, like we met in Kazan in the encounter of BRICS in Russia. According to me, now is irrefutable that the world is shifting to a new multipolar division that is a world that people uses more and more often. And it's true that you can feel that diplomacy switching places. And hopefully Latin America wakes up and the south of the world wakes up, and we use this moment, this opportunity of changes of relationships of power to find our way into a position where we're actually invited to participate. Because today, the voice of the global south is mostly an echo. Like most countries, and even the G20, it's kind of hard to take the G20 seriously because most decision makers are coming from the north to tell the global south how to behave, what to do, to adopt, eco policies and environmental policies and inclusion, identity politics. This is all coming dictated from the north, which is something that don't really interest the needs and the priorities of the south. We need development. We need industrial potency. We need to take care of the working class. We don't need to be involved into identity politics and whatever is happening into the north of the world. That's why I think the G20 is losing credibility fast and happening so close, happening in a time frame that is so close to the BRICS encounter in Russia. We can already see where the real decisions are being made. We saw that the repercussion of the encounter in BRICS in Kazan was much more influential and determinant to public policy in the global south than the G20 was. This is already a clear indication that the material forces and the material conditions happening underneath propaganda, ideology, spectacle, and media, it's much more important and determinant to what is truly happening in politics. People need to wake up from propaganda. But regardless, the threat of World War III is very much real, and it's also materially determined.
Now, there are at least three, and two main, but there are three theaters in which World War III could break out. One is obviously in Ukraine, the second in the Persian Gulf, and maybe even very, very soon indeed, maybe a matter of hours, days. And the third, though less often talked about now, remains China, in the South China Sea, in the Straits of Taiwan. How do you see those three theaters? Tell us, if you will, with your giant brain, what's going to happen in these three places?
Well, first of all, I have to make the statement that this in a way reflects the crisis of liberalism. It reflects the crisis of democratical fundamentalism, and in a way how democracy and liberal values have become more and more authoritarian and oppressive. And in a way, their universal liberal project has to be imposed via military means. Okay, so this is a critical failure of liberal values that we are now seeing in, as you mentioned very concisely, in these three fronts, right? So China, mostly because of the importance of microchips and the development technology and how this technology is fundamental for most sovereignty issues. So that's why it became such a hot topic. But then when we talk about the genocide in Palestine and the conflict in Ukraine, is an extension of Anglo-imperial intentions. In a way, they need a military base in the Middle East. We have known this for a very long time. The price of petroleum is very much dictated by geopolitical stability in the region, so they need a stake. They need to be heard and feared in order to maintain a certain level of hegemony. And Russia has always been motherland. Motherland in the sense that their resources values are way too important. The Baltics have been at war since the dawn of civilization. So everybody has been attacking Russia. They have been invaded several times across history. And this is just the most recent iteration of the fact that whoever is dominating the geopolitical environment is trying to reach out into the pockets of Russians and into their reserve of natural resources. Again, this is all implied and very much explained by material conditions. But what is important for me is that people have to always be critical of whatever is the currently dominating meta-narrative that is trying to be imposed upon us. Like human rights and, oh my God, we're fighting against dictatorships and we're doing this in the name of democracy and freedom. And it's mostly bullshit. It's mostly bullshit in the sense that what we truly understand from a positive point of view, not normative, but positive in the Kantian way, what positively means democracy today is war. Democracy is no longer about freedom of expression or about representing the will of the majority. Demoskrasia, the rule of the majorities. That's no longer truth. Positively measured in the world, democracy is today synonym with imperialism, intervention, and war. This is what we need to be truly aware.
Now, if you were advising President Putin, what would you advise him to do about the fact that the United States, Britain, and France are firing cruise missiles into his country? We both remember me more clearly than you, obviously, the Soviet Union. I asked the viewers earlier, can you imagine any Soviet leader, however gerontocratic they became by the end, allowing 3 NATO countries to fire cruise missiles into their territory? That we'd already be in World War III if that had happened in the Soviet times. So if you were advising President Putin now and Mr. Lavrov, what would you say to them?
So first of all, what a great segue for such an important topic. By definition, leaders, true leaders, they are the ones that take the impossible decisions, the ones that no one else could take. You know, because when a decision is doable, it's rationable, you can achieve and you can arrive at a solution. But by definition, leaders are the ones that make the impossible decisions at the most crucial times. And this is exactly the example. We already have a historical debt to the people of Russia and to the administration of the Soviet Union, so we don't speak German today. The fact that we're having this conversation in English is mostly thanks to the Soviet army. This is important for us to remember. And right now, we are not at World War III, thanks to the prudence and to the self-control of President Putin and all the high leadership positions in Russia. It's only due to their restraint and to their character that we're able to have this conversation freely today, and that we're not hiding in bunkers, planning for a long winter that everyone is going to decay in. So my advice is that they need urgently to broker a deal with the transition team from President Trump, understanding that this is an act of sabotage from the from the Democrats against the Republicans. This is critical, this is urgent, and needs to be addressed immediately. And I think the more the true international community joins the conversation and understand our stake in the game, we need to push for this conversation to happen. Because I think in the media, this narrative can no longer sustain itself. Nobody it's in favor of this war happening. It's really a minority. This is only being pursued and sponsored by mercenary groups and by manufacturers of arms that are making a killing out of these conflicts. But these wars are heavily unpopular. So we need to raise our voices. We need to reach as much as we can. We need to have these type of conversations that we're having. And I thank you so much for organizing these spaces. And we need to raise awareness, and we need to understand that all our lives are danger if this is not to be done. And we need to be very careful and very supportive and very thankful for President Putin for playing this with such a restraint and a prudence and not letting things get out of hand too quick. I think the fact that Russia showed power by revealing some weapons and just by showing that you guys don't really want to get too far into this because we can make mutual assured destruction. Just by doing that, we are keeping things at bay. But according to me, unless they broker a deal with the transition team in President Trump's team, this won't slow down. On the contrary, I think it's going to get harder and harder the next few days because they're getting close to losing power. So they're trying to make as much money and in a way determine the movement of geopolitics for the next years as much as they can. So these next few weeks are going to be highly critical.
Let me ask a philosophical question, because you are, apart from all your other attributes, a philosopher. I don't actually entirely buy the argument that it's all about money. I get that the military-industrial complex makes and has made tons of money of recent conflicts and instability. But I don't get how or why capitalists, those who own corporations, those who live such a wonderful life on this earth, at the expense of the many, no doubt. I don't get why they would take the existential risk of nuclear oblivion. There's no profit in that. I gave the example of Elon Musk because I'm very annoyed with him. He has immense media power, but he's not using it at all to rally the the public, the majority that you referred to, against the danger of war. He must know if there is a world war, he doesn't have any corporations anymore. He doesn't have any Starlinks anymore. We'll not be going to Mars. We'll be going to hell rather than Mars. Why does globalized capitalism not apply the brakes to what the politicians and the MIC are doing?
Right. So I agree with your first thesis in the notion that is not everything is determined by money, and we can see this clearly, giving reason to your thesis, the fact that Elon Musk is so heavily favoring Trump. Why? Because he's losing an industrial battle against China, with BYD completely destroying his electric vehicle category. So he needs a president that he can instrumentalize in order to assure his economical advantages in the market, right? So he needs protectionism. But this has always been the story of liberalism. Market has never been free. Capital has never been truly free, in the sense that free market capitalism, it's only an ideology imposed to the global South in order to tear down resistances so the North can extract as much surplus value as they can from the South. But there has never existed a truly free market capital. There can never be a truly free market capital, because capital depends on matters of property, on the central emission of money. So free market is completely impossible. It's a pipe dream for metaphysical idealists, right? So having said that, I think that today the divide is between sovereignty, nationalist capitalists, and globalist warmongering capitalists. So in a way, it's the capitalist class that is mostly at war with each other. In the fact that, for example, the Democrats would favor a heads-on confrontation with China directly, while the Republicans prefer a confrontation, a strategic peace with Russia, and then a second-degree confrontation with China. So I still believe they are both, in a way, delivering against the interest of the private property of the means of productions and the proliferation of capital. But it's just two different strategies. One is more traditional neoliberalism, like tearing down every type of resistances, physical, moral, geopolitical, national, that resist the proliferation of capital as a self-perpetuating logical system. And then on the other side, conservative capital is much more about nationalizing authority, in a way, authoritarianism, reinforcing national industry to favor local capitalists, where Elon Musk is. But in a way, they both respond to capitalism because they are both defending private property of the means of productions. They're not new meta modes of production. They're not like China or like Russia or like Vietnam, Malaysia, North Korea or Venezuela. No. They're still defending private property and liberal values. That's why it's confusing when people say liberals and Republicans in the US, because they're both liberals. It's just like Democratic liberals and Republican liberals, but they both think under the metaphysical epistemological framework of liberalism. They believe in free will, they believe in the reasonable individual. They're both doing identity politics, just different flavors, and they're both defending private property of the means of productions and the interest of capitals. It's just like they have different sponsors. That's it.
Now, finally, when we were talking in the BRICS conference, in Kazan, we were both, let's put it this way, we were both hoping for Kamala Harris's defeat. We weren't hoping for Donald Trump's victory, but we were both hoping for Kamala Harris's defeat. Were we right or wrong to do so?
I think we're absolutely right. Now, seeing how much the potential war scaled and how much environments are heated, I think it's now clear that the Democrats have completely lost their mind in their lust for money making via war means, which is potentially catastrophic. And in that sense, it's weird to say that the lesser of two evils, right? Because in a way, again, the US is losing global hegemony. We are seeing how this decay is happening. No empire has a peaceful decay. This is what we have to keep in mind. Today, we are seeing the violent decay. It's like a predatory animal that will die fighting. So how will they die fighting, and who will they mangle in the process is what is being determined today. I think the second term of Trump can be highly disappointing because he already failed to resolve the internal issues of the country. He did nothing for the working class, just like Biden did nothing for the working class, and Kamala was not going to do nothing for the working class. But I believe again that Trump again is going to do nothing for the working class. So how long they can keep this simulated oscillation of power, internal controlled opposition, how long they can sustain this farce for the American, for the United States is my question now. And how much is going to cost us as the geopolitical context in which they are losing hegemony. So yes, I think we're absolutely right to root against Kamala Harris, but not necessarily in favor of Donald Trump.
Diego Ruzzarin, A Star is Born, geopolitical analyst and author. I know you were already born in Latin America, but here in the North, in the West. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. The poll is now 50,422. Someone will tell me if that's a record, but it feels like a record poll to me. And I've already indicated well over 90%, an average of 95% say that Netanyahu is guilty of war crimes. Let's take a short break, then I'll give you an update. And it's an astonishing one on the general election petition. Stay tuned.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As Vischer says, the Twitter sphere where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
So 51,592 people have voted on our poll and found overwhelmingly guilty Netanyahu and his co-accused. No one's told me yet, but I'm calling that a world record MOATS poll result. Now, let's go back to the lines. Vasilis in Cyprus on World War III. Go ahead, Vasilis.
Yes, hello. Hello?
Hello, welcome. You're on the air.
Yes, hello. Is this Mr. Galloway speaking, or am I speaking to somebody else?
It is. You're speaking to George Galloway and a very large audience around the world.
Hello, Mr. Galloway. My name is Vasilis. I don't want to identify my surname yet. At this point, I am a former senior lecturer of the University of Cambridge. After having served for 26 years with dignity and respect to my institution. And 4 years ago, I found myself in a position where I had to seek early retirement for both to preserve my personal dignity and sanity, And I'm not calling about that, though. I'm just trying to tell you something about what you said in regards to an effectively runaway effect that will lead us to a, well, third world war from what it seems now we're heading towards, either in Iran or Iran-Israel or Ukraine, NATO, and Russia. I would think that the conflict point, the flashpoint, will be in the West Asia region. And may I joke here? I would like to self-identify, quote unquote, as you like to play with this term, as a systems analyst, theorist, and designer. And a lot of the social scientists with whom I have a lot of respect for what they say seem to go in various tangents, but I think it's a very simple situation. If you have 20 seconds for me to explain, and then you can ask me. I think what we're facing here in the West, in the collective West, is a self-organized structure of many individuals that have structured themselves in a hierarchy of multiple scales. One could analyze the scales ad infinitum, but I'd like to stick with just three levels. One is the hereditary level, whether you wish to call it the aristocrats or whether you wish to call them the oligarchs that pass the business to the children and their children's children, and there's no chance of renewal or rejuvenation of that organization in a healthy way, so it stays in a closed circle. So we have tier number one, which many people say they are psychopaths, they say they're sociopaths, they say they're narcissists, pardon me. I would like to say they're just petulant children that never grew up from kindergarten level, where they want to have their way, and the only thing they know is the little own world, and when their toys are taken away, they just throw a tantrum. The next tier, number two, is our politicians. Our politicians are the servants of level number one, the hereditary level, slightly more educated, slightly more capable. The top tier is totally nepotistic, if you want to call it that. I think they're totally inbred. The second tier, they're nepotists, and they serve the upper tier in order to preserve the power. The upper tier, they're totally uneducated, have no clue about reality. They don't really live in the same world as we do. The second tier is a little bit better, the politicians, but they are also inclined to serve the upper tier in order to preserve the position, the privileges, the power, and so on and so forth. And then we have the third tier, which is the actuators, if that is a correct English term to use, which are the ones that carry out the orders of all the above structure. Now, there's no feedback in the system, in the sense that the upper tier says, I want this toy. The second tier says, let's see how we can make it happen and build the narrative that we can sell to the lower tier as an ideology in order to motivate them. The lower tier are, you know, the military, the public servants of lower levels that simply are survivalists, that want to get the salary at the end of the day, and maybe bonuses and whatever else comes in an indirect and obviously non-taxable way. And this goes on and on. But what I'm trying to say, this is a top-down structure.
I
in the
think
West.
we are in danger of going on and on, I will have to draw your contribution to a close, riveting though it was. Some people think you're artificial intelligence, but I know you're a Cambridge academic. And I'm glad that you called the show. Let's say that was part one of your analysis of the class structure that we have in Western countries. Do come back subsequent shows to further educate us. You've been marvelous, Vasilis in Cyprus. But I must go to Jason in Crawley on the left and the war. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I mean, I'm Jason from Crawley, and I was really on the left when I was younger. I studied at Ruskin College in Oxford in the 1990s. You've probably heard of it. And at that time, I was really waiting for Tony Blair to come into power. But Tony Blair, being the real capitalistic Tory, was a terrible disappointment with all of those wars. And I'm just wondering why a lot of the colleagues that I've got and friends, they really support this war against Putin in this fantasy world that he's going to invade Europe. And secondly, I speak to some Eastern Europeans from Poland and Hungary, and they also believe that are scared of Putin, that he's going to attack them, which is pretty shocking. I'm just wondering why that is and how this indoctrination happens. And I've got one more question.
Indoctrination is a powerful thing. Propaganda is a powerful thing. Advertising is a powerful thing. Orwell described in Keep the Aspidistra Flying the advertising industry as legalized lying. And the propaganda industry is the same. It's legalized lying. And if you tell a lie often enough, as Dr. Goebbels told us, eventually a significant number of people will be fooled by it. And the fact that some of them are university educated doesn't surprise me one little bit. I speak as someone who never went to a university, someone whose university was on the streets, and I've always been persuaded that most of the wisdom is on the streets and not in the ivory towers. Even in Ruskin College, which is a more proletarian ivory tower, but an ivory tower nonetheless, Jason. So I think the British in particular are victims of more than a century and a half of virulent anti-Russian propaganda. And we've got a lot of sheep in this country. They don't know that Britain's cruising for a bruising and is going to get a very severe bruising indeed. And if I thought that that bruising would be suffered by the brass, by the generals, and by the ministers, and those in power in Britain, I'd be quite sanguine about it. But it's because I know that that bruising will hurt the ordinary British people who have no interest in war with Russia, that our living standards, our interests, and even our lives are at risk in this confrontation, that I oppose the confrontation and appeal to the Russian government to know that the criminals who rule us, and they are criminals, do not represent the real feelings and interests of the mass of the British public. And I hope that Russia will bear that in mind. Jason, thanks for the call. Eric Pachiti says, is Netanyahu guilty of war crimes? Does a snake drag its ass? That's a new one. Rolo Tomasi says, to keep his hopium alive, Trump needs a war to end and a deal to make for Gaza. He'll take a line which appears sensible only to the ignorant, which robs the Palestinians but looks like peace. Arsenal says, George Galloway called it before the election. Starmer will get us in a major war within 6 months. Thanks for that, Arsenal. I don't often get support from the slopes of Highbury, or whatever it's called now, but I'll take it. Morn's lad said, the most hated Prime Minister in British history, And that includes the far-right lunatic who was Thatcher. Well, we've had a lot worse lunatics than Thatcher, I'm afraid, in the years since. Eric Klein sends €20. Thank you, Eric. It says strength and honour to the British Workers' Party. Thank you very much indeed, Eric. Let's go on the line to Copenhagen, where Donald is always worth hearing. What's your take, Donald?
Yeah. Thank you very much, George. I love listening to the gentleman that you just had, this Spanish-speaking gentleman. I can't recall his name, though. Yeah. But anyway.
Yes, Diego.
Yeah. I'd like to reiterate this idea that you promoted here about the United States and associating with the mafia policy, And, for example, I live in Denmark, and we own Greenland, and the idea is that they've told the prime minister here, a nice piece of property got here, shame if anything happened to it. This is extortion and robbery of resources that's going on, and it has been my entire life. I'm born in 1942. I can remember this. Mr. Kissinger did make a statement that is valid to this day. He said to be an enemy of the United States is to be dangerous. To be its ally is fatal. And that holds true right now. And these times are very difficult. And I'm rooting for Putin. I think he's the only source of intelligence and moderate or rational thinking on the planet right now in regards to the conflicts. I just returned from San Francisco, and it was amazing the ignorance of those people over there. My friends included, and people that I talk to have absolutely no idea what's going on globally. And my one person I talked to about the conflict in Ukraine being started in 2014, they said, no, it did not. I said, Google it. And they said, that's the least reliable source of information, And this is, we're talking absolute propaganda that's pushing the narrative daily in these Americans. And this needs to stop. Anybody that thinks that there's no genocide in Gaza, it does not know what a war crime is. They have absolutely no idea what this is.
Well, that's right. The only consolation I'll give you, Donald, and like you, I've been doing this a long time. The only consolation I can give you is that while there are millions, tens, scores of millions of sheep, there are more people awake and alive to the truth in our countries today than there have ever been. And that's because of the revolutionary potential of the free flow of information and the possibility of holding programs like this, listened to, watched by people like you in Copenhagen, people in Mexico, people all over the world coming together twice a week for what is the Open University of the airwaves. And that is sharing information at a rate that has never been seen before. I have every week over now 4 million viewers for this show alone. If you include the reach that I've got on social media, particularly on X, but also on Facebook and Instagram and Rumble and even on TikTok, we're broadcasting live right now on TikTok. Then it's millions and millions of people. Now, when I started out in politics, I could only speak to hundreds of people. And only then, by printing a leaflet from a stencil on a drum of ink, cutting it into 4, then handing it out in the street, pressing it on unwilling and highly often offended members of the public. Now, when I say something, I can say something right now, and it will reach millions of people. And that gives us a power which we never had before, and we're beginning to see the fruits of it. Unfortunately, the whole orchard might be burned down before we get the chance to win. One of my shows is Have It Out with Galloway. Here's how you can join it. Watch this. Join me every week to Have It Out with Galloway. We discuss the great issues of the day and occasionally the odd philosophical meandering through the meaning of life. You can be on the show by contacting us at our website, haveitoutwithgalloway.com. You can be the star of the show. Join me on Have It Out with Galloway. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, the poll is closed. A record 51,905 people cast their vote on it. And overwhelmingly, Netanyahu is guilty. Thanks to everyone who participated in that poll this evening. A quick call, and then Gayatri joins me in the studio. It's Joseph in West Sussex on Netanyahu. Go ahead, Joseph.
Hi, good evening. It's a great pleasure, Mr. Galloway. A dear friend of real Iraqi people. Beside the other points, there is no question about it. He is a criminal. But then he committed a crime in this country, in UK, their biggest allies, so-called, and supporters. In 10 Downing Street, he planted a spying device in Bonson's office, in his toilet. Look how cheap is this man.
In his toilet, yeah. Imagine.
In his toilet.
Imagine.
He
Boris
planted
Johnson's toilet, of all people.
Yeah. And that is his allies, right? I mean, what kind of man he is. Mm-hmm. How on earth people are defending or trying put sanction on other countries to defend a person like this. It don't add up. And we still sending him weapons, and we're trying to cut corners to avoid his arrest.
Joseph, these warrants would have been released. These warrants would have been issued 3 months ago. It was the British who obstructed it for 3 whole months. Now, I'm glad that you reminded me, for I had forgotten it and had not opined on it, that Netanyahu, amongst his many other crimes, planted a bugging device in the toilet of Boris Johnson. Now, knowing what I do about the lifestyle of Boris Johnson, I can only imagine the horrors that bug has picked up. But it was a real indicator that this is what they'll do to their best friends. What would they do to the people living under their jackboots in the occupied Palestinian territories? Joseph, I have to ask you to make way for my good wife, Gayatri, who's joined me in the studio. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Lots of wrestling. Lots of our audience were very happy that we introduced them to Diego Ruzzarin. Very impressed, and he lived up to your big introduction. We looked at the poll. Is Netanyahu guilty of war crimes? It feels like we are repeating the question. There's always one way or the other of describing him in his most evil way.
Although that's the biggest poll we've ever had.
Yes. Have we had confirmation from our director? We don't know yet, but it looks like it.
I'm calling it the biggest one we've ever had.
As the ragged-trousered philanthropist asks, why is there even a no options? I mean, is the Pope a Catholic? I mean, obviously.
Well, almost 1 in 10 on Twitter, where the dead enders are, and on the YouTube community poll, 9% in both cases said no, he's not guilty of war crimes. That's 1 in 10. Now, they can't all be in Ward 5 in the asylum for the criminally insane in Broadmoor. They can't all be there in the Cuckoo's Nest ward. Some of them must be like these Japanese soldiers that hid out on the islands for decades after the war, ready still to die for an emperor who had long surrendered.
I remember that. That's funny. Yeah. or they think that he is actually something worse than a war crime. I don't know how you would define it legally. Wolfgang says Netanyahu is as guilty as Hitler. They both share the same ideology, extermination. And, they don't bat around it. They have said it multiple times.
The irony in that is off the charts, of course.
Yeah, that's from Wolfgang. So the answer to the poll is clearly yes.
It's even bigger now, Gayatri. The final total is 52,748 people voted. Now, if that's not a record poll, I'm a Dutchman.
Yeah, and you haven't even included the ones from the Patreon yet. So there you go. Nicholas Johns, though, says, all right, so he's a war criminal, guilty. But if so, what of those who have been actively complicit in aiding of such unspeakable crimes?
Yeah.
I mean, they can't get away with it just because one of them goes behind bars.
Not one member of the Labour Friends of Israel has resigned as a result of the issuing of these arrest warrants. Imagine that. Not one.
Well, speaking of Labour, Bernsey says, well, let's see what Kit Starmer says now, because as we have seen, he does the opposite of everything he says. Yes, we said so. And Ravindra Bhatia says, for the younger ones amongst us, look up quisling in the dictionary if you want to get a different angle on Keir Sabotage Starmer. Quisling, who is...
Quisling was the Nazi collaborator in Norway, and he gave his name to such people forever after.
Yeah, you will immediately wonder whether Starmer, the treacherous foreign plant, already deserved the same fate as Quisling. So this is one from John in Budapest. He says, George, this is a great show as always. The Western elites are behind the pathetic puppet politicians, duly like rabid dogs that is trapped in a corner. Lindsey Graham is their perfect spokesman.
Yes,
they need tranquilizing quickly.
The oleaginous Lindsey Graham. They say he dresses in women's clothes, but I haven't personally seen. Yeah, he's widely believed to be like J. Edgar Hoover, a man who likes to dress in women's clothes, which is why I call him Linda Graham. But perhaps we're going down a rabbit hole here.
Can I just read out this one? This is from Clinton Wright. He says, I am not too old to remember a certain wise young man that faced the Senate in Washington to clear his name and set the record straight, which he did with dignity and courage. So if Bibi is innocent, travel to the Netherlands and face the judges face to face.
Well, now this must be very difficult for you. You were born there. You speak the language. It's almost your mother tongue, along with Indonesian. By the way, we're in the charts in Indonesia.
I saw it, and I'm so happy about it.
We're in the top 5 in Indonesia. That's down to you, I think. But the truth is, here's little Netherlands, not seeking harm to anyone, being openly threatened with invasion by a U.S. Senator, Tom Cotter. You couldn't make that up. Do the people in the Netherlands know?
Well, you make it even more complicated than you already put it, because obviously I'm from Indonesian stock, which this tiny, innocent country that you describe colonized for 300 years. So.
Not so innocent after all.
Then they also came up with the word apartheid. But yeah, this is obviously very interesting because the Netherlands was the center of all the news with all the, on the back of the Tel Aviv Maccabi fans, havoc that they caused in Amsterdam. And the politicians and the media and even the king in the Netherlands, they
sided with the criminals.
Yeah, they portrayed them as the victims. They even described it as a pogrom, which was really infuriating for those.
The mayor has walked that back now, you see that. The mayor of Amsterdam has regretted that she used the word pogrom.
Well, regret or not, we shall never forget.
Well
Let's see. So.
One more?
One more. Let's see. Yes. So, George, this is from Tony. Article 5 of the NATO Charter is a myth. The majority of NATO members will never attempt to fight Russia, China, Iran, Belarus, or North Korea. It would be the end of NATO.
I keep making this point because I sense that out there are people who think that if, say, Russia decided of all its enemies, Britain was the most virulent, but also the easiest, softest target. if Britain was attacked by Russia, there are people out there who believe that France would launch its nuclear weapons in our defense, or that the United States would launch its nuclear weapons in our defense, rather than what would actually happen, that they would both seek a halt before this goes any further. Trust me, it's Harry Callaghan. Did I fire 5 shots or did I fire 6? Are you feeling lucky, punk? Are you? Gayatri, thank you. I'll take it for chips. I'm hurrying you on only because there's a legend on the line in New York. It's the one and only Erebos on the pole. What have you got to say, Erebos?
Salutations and greetings, Mr. Galloway, to you, your family, the indefatigable Mrs. Gayatri Galloway in her university teacher attire. And the poll, you know, I was recast into the outer darkness of the molded, detrimental shelter system, so I couldn't contact you because I had no Wi-Fi. And I managed to escape. I had to get the F out of there, as they would say. In any event, the poll, my view on the poll is that Netanyahu, to hearken to one of the statements read by Mrs. Galloway, is that he's more than a war criminal because he didn't just kill people during this war. He murdered people, crimes against humanity. It didn't, outside before the war even started, before it was even a thought. He murdered people, not just indigenous Palestinians and Palestinian Arabs, but their supporters. And not just him, but his predecessors around the world. They murdered people in Africa. You have been through the list, the British officials, including, the Prime Minister himself. They were going for his head. So he's much worse than a war criminal. And I think if he's lucky, there's a theory that Hitler and some of his elites ended up in Argentina after. Lucky, that's going to be his fate.
Well,
but if not, he needs to be ended.
Yeah, well, he might end up in Argentina, Robos, because they've said they're not going to arrest him.
And I would like to take, as time is always against us, I would like to take a stab at your question, that you've presented to the most excellent of guests. That guy Diego, he's really something. Why the capitalists, the neoliberal capitalists, why they are threatening their own existential profiteering and things like that. I think for the same reason the shitlibs were against us when we did the first Rage Against the War Machine. They fundamentally do not believe that a nuclear attack is possible or would happen. Some of them, even though they know better and they have even more access to informational resources that me and B has, they're in a state of denial. They don't really think Putin, because they do understand something about Putin's psychology. All that time he spent in Germany and all that time he spent in the West, and his CEO sort of business first type presentation, they're counting on the fact that he's not going to go that far, and this is why I don't think that they're taking stock that he's not Nikita, he's not Khrushchev, he's not Stalin, he's not any of these people who, as you have adumbrated before in this program, would put an end to all this foolishness long ago. Like I've mentioned, anyone dreaming of hurting the Soviet Union would wake up and apologize. And with that, I thank you, the MOATS audience. Much power and blessings to thee.
What a wonderful call to end the show on from a true legend, Erebos in New York. President Putin definitely isn't Nikita Khrushchev, who was a clown, in my opinion. Neither is he Stalin, but he's much closer to Stalin than any other Russian leader has ever been. He has a mind that calamity has hardened and turn to steel. He is extremely cautious, but cautious only for a purpose. He is cautious in the hope that the goals of the operation that he's involved the country in can be achieved at the cheapest possible price in human blood. He wants to preserve the civilian population in Ukraine, not least because a third of them are Russian. He wishes to preserve the soil and the industrial wealth that largely were the beneficence of the USSR as was. The military-industrial complex factory that was destroyed by these intercontinental ballistic missiles or intermediate-range nuclear missiles with conventional warheads, whatever they were. By the way, why has no one ever shown us a picture of that plant that was destroyed by those 5 missiles? I think you know the reason. Because it will have been leveled to dust. And they don't want you to see that. He has not wanted to destroy the civilian infrastructure of Ukraine, not least because he hopes that friends of his will inherit it, that these places that remain in the Novorus, in the new Russia, will not have to begin again from scratch, will not have to build their dams, their electricity supply, their roads and bridges, because obviously the Russians could have destroyed every bridge, every substation, every power plant. They could have destroyed every highway. They could have destroyed every railway. Surely this is obvious, even to the thickest skulls out there. They could have done all of that and may yet now do that, but they have not done that so far. Because Putin is a cautious guy. But no one should mistake that caution for weakness. I've met the man. 3 times I've met him. I've met lots of leaders. I've met leaders from all over the world, including all of the British leaders that I sat in Parliament under. Vladimir Putin is a very determined guy. He has a clear set of goals. He told you about them in 2007 in Munich. He warned you in 2007 that Russia regarded NATO encroachment in Ukraine as a red line matter for the existential survival of the Russian Federation, which it is his job to defend, and nobody should make the mistake of thinking that he will not do that job. People misunderestimated Stalin, but Stalin wasn't Stalin when he told the beast of Berlin that we will crush you in your lair. Stalin wasn't Stalin. Putin isn't Stalin. Trust me on that. This has been the mother of all talk shows. I hope very much that you will join us on Wednesday for a special midweek edition of the mother of all talk shows. I think it'll be special because I think the all-out regional war in the Middle East will be raging by then, and you'll want to come here to hear all about it. Good night.